Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. Today we have no webcam because, well, I have the flu and it looks like I've been pretty much hit by a freight train, so I thought I'd save you the, looking at the face today. Today we're going to be looking at a bunch of vehicles which I think would fit as event vehicles in the upcoming years for War Thunder. And in this video we're going to be looking at some ground vehicles, and what I've done is I'm using basically major sources here, which basically means these are the sources which I personally believe have the most information collectively of the sources that I personally looked at, so therefore you can take the majority of information from these. It will also be extended upon from other sources that I've looked at, but just understand I'm just giving the general major sources for you for these vehicles. I want to do one on aircraft and I also want to do one on naval, and so those will be out in the next few days, but I thought since, we're coming to the end of the festive event, let's have a look forward and give some ideas about what would be cool to see as event vehicles. Now, my general criteria for event vehicles is there has to be a standard tech tree equivalent, which is similar to it, at least in playstyle, or at least in definition, and also the event vehicle must be worse than the standard tech tree one, because you don't want to be giving, special premiums to the people who are playing the game the most, because then you end up in a situation where the people who play the game the most absolutely annihilate everybody else, and that really isn't too fair. So the ones that I've picked out here, you may not like them because they're not, too good, but for my criteria of interesting vehicles which are designed to be unique but still, have a tech tree equivalent, I think, these work pretty well. So we have one per nation, so let's get started with the T37 Light Tank. Now this is an American prototype light tank. Basically, after World War II, there was a few commissions which were brought together in the US, and they decided that they needed a new light tank. The M24 Chaffee was good, but they wanted something which had a bit more oomph in it when it came to the gun, and also when it came to the raw power of the engine. Therefore, in 1946, they came together with some criteria, which basically ended up with a gun, with a 76mm gun, which was capable of penetrating 127mm of armor, sloped at 30 degrees at 940 meters, and the vehicle itself was supposed to weigh around 25 tons, so a straight up upgrade from the M24 Chaffee that we saw before. Now, in July of 1946, they basically created some ideas and some designs, and it was officially designated the T37, and then it was recommended in the same year, basically around September 1946, to make 3 prototypes of said design. This was reduced to 2 in May of 1947. Now these were completed in 1949. There was also a wooden mock-up built, and this was basically to show that the idea could work, or give a general, scale model for people to understand. The vehicle had a crew of 4, so you have the commander, driver, gunner, loader. It had a Continental AOS 8951 engine, which had 500 gross horsepower at 2800 RPM, and it also weighed 21.9 tons, so it was actually lower than what they wanted, and also it was lower than never mind, that's about the World of Tanks stuff. Also, the maximum speed was 41 miles per hour, 66 kilometers an hour, so it was pretty nippy, and obviously when you're creating a light tank, you want it to be used for reconnaissance, but also have a bit of oomph behind it. You need a bit of speed. The actual armor on it is pretty pitiful, which is good, because you don't want it to be overpowered. So upper plate 25, angled at 60, lower 32, angled at 45, hull and sides 19 to 25 millimeters, and the rear was 19. The turret front 32, mantlet 25 to 32, and the sides and rear 25. So nothing, insane. And in my opinion, this vehicle should actually get hull broken. Also, it used the 76mm T94 gun, which had 9 degrees of gun depression and could fire 12 rounds per minute. Now, they did extend on this idea of the T94, and they actually created another machine in Phase 2, and this was renamed the T41. Now, this is the T37. that you see in front of you. But basically the T41 was the same idea, but with an auto-loading system in it, with a slightly modified gun. That actually went on to become the M41 Bulldog, which we have in game. So that's why I like the idea of adding this T37. We have in the American tree a bunch of light tanks already, T92, Bulldog, Chaffee, and also stuff like the Ontos, even though it's labeled as a tank destroyer, does have scouting, and also the Scorpion. Well, this T-37 could easily fit in the gap between the M24 and the Bulldog, and I think it could fit as a great little scout tank, which has a little bit of speed behind it, and with the 76mm that it has, it also should have a bit more oomph. So for me, I think this would be a great pick as an event vehicle for the Americans. Obviously, it is just a prototype, so I don't think it is main tech tree worthy, but it was fully tested at the Aberdeen testing grounds, therefore it should be put into game. The Germans have much more of a weird one from my point of view. This is the 105mm leFH 18.6 Alpha Waffentrager IVb. Now, what happens when you take a evolution of a Panzer IV chassis and decide to stick a 105 on it? Well, you're looking at it. Now, there isn't just that about this tank, though. So they took a Panzer IV chassis and they wanted to have a gun which could be transported around the battlefield at the same rate as the battlefield that was going on. So as the tanks moved forward, they wanted an assault gun to move forward with it. But it's actually the idea of it is that it would never see, frontline combat. This would be a complete support gun in the form of the 105mm, and it would only fire HE. So this was not a tank killer gun. This was designed to suppress infantry, to support offensives and even defensives. Now, how would it do this? Well, first of all, this is a general picture of it. Looks pretty standard, right? The turret itself was not designed to be hit hard. It was designed only to repel small arms fire and also some HE shells. And when I mean HE shells, I mean like small HE shells or mortars. It was not designed for stopping AP. So this was, as I said, not supposed to be a frontline vehicle. But it had a bit of a trick to it. Do you see this? Well, this is the mechanism designed to take the turret off of this machine. And the reason you take the turret off is if your army, let's say, or squad, or whatever you want to say, gets to a battlefield, the idea is that these 105s dismount and they are used for support of the advancing forces, or if you are being defensive. The reason for this is so the Panzer IV chassis that you can see in this picture would be used as an ammo carrier. Now, the thing could already carry, I believe it was like 81 rounds, which is 87, high explosives, but if you took the turret off and left it somewhere, then you could be able to carry more shells in this modified Panzer IV chassis. So this wasn't just a machine which was supposed to, follow the tanks in. It was also supposed to be designed to aid an artillery piece which it would create by taking off its turret. Now, whether that design is a good idea or not, I mean, personally, I think stuff like the Vesp or the Hummel are better ideas from this point of view, but for this, it's kind of interesting and a wonderful idea. Here you can see that the turret itself, you could actually flop off the back bits and bring them down so you could have more maneuverability for the guys inside who are firing, and it also shows that the gun itself could at least go 90 degrees either way. And there also seems to be something stuck out here. I don't think it's a foot, but I like to imagine it's a foot of somebody who's trying to find some keys at the bottom of the thing. But anyway, this is a very simple idea. Basically, you take a Panzer IV in game, slightly change the chassis, put this very weakly armoured turret on top of it, plus the 105, only fires HE. Maybe you can give it a little bit of a different round, but if you just want to use it to fire HE, this could be a great rank 2 vehicle. I mean, we have vehicles like this, Stone panzer, technically. You know, Brumbar is very similar to how this thing would work. Also stuff like the Chiha short gun, which is obviously the lower tier Japanese special premium that you could get for accessing the tree. But since we have a decent amount of low velocity guns, which are designed as howitzers in the German tree, such as the Stu 42 Sturmpanzer, stuff like that, I thought, you know, why not have a gift vehicle version of an interesting one? Now, I don't think there should be I don't think you should be able to, you know, take off the turrets and plonk it somewhere and then just drive off with the chassis, but I still think it's a cool idea if we just have it as a general tank. And for me, you know, this part would be something maybe for the Vespa or the Hummel, but I would prefer them to be normal tech tree vehicles. The next one to have a look at is a Soviet design, which, now, over the years, while I've been acquainting myself with some Soviet machines, basically what I find every time I look for these things, when it comes to the object series of stuff, we start getting weirder and weirder. And the ideas of, you know, why are they creating these things get a little bit slimmer and slimmer until we get to about the insanity stage. Now, I'm generally talking about post-World War II, when they decided they wanted to create a new set of heavy tanks, and they created a bunch of blueprints which were just crazy, and if ever added to the game would be pretty much game breaking because of the fact of their armor being diamond shaped and then like 300 millimeters angled at about 60, and then having massive stonking guns. Obviously, there's a reason why these weren't built, because if they were built, you know, you'd basically only be able to make one and that would be it. But the mid-war stuff, there's also some interesting designs, and they normally come in the KV series. So the KV-7 was an idea where you had a gun, the F-34 gun, so the 76mm, which was also mounted with two 45mm, with recoil mechanisms for the triplex, as it was called. So basically you'd have a mount which could mount these three guns at the same time, looking straight from the turret, and, well, obviously this causes a few problems, such as space, but it means that it could be done. And the idea was, with this design, with the 245s, with the 176 in the center of it, they wanted to create a machine which would be able to have, you know, different firepower, and they wanted 1 in 5 KVs to be like this. So to have this, you know, set of armament, or at least this triplex idea behind it. So what they did was they created a few prototypes. They wanted assault tanks, and if you know what an assault tank is, obviously it's an offensive tank designed to destroy bunkers, designed to destroy lines, designed to very much in the way of like World War I tanks, I suppose, where they're kind of supposed to go across the field, break the defenses, stuff follows them, all of that. Well, they made some interesting monstrosities, so we're not going to go into the T34-3 right now, but just understand, if you want to look at a wacky design, go and have a look at the T34-3. I mean, I'll just show you the picture here. Look at what's going on here. Look at this monster. Look at this. Bloody hell. Anyway, back to reality. Up there goes sanity. The KV-7 was an idea where they took the U-13, which was, if you have a look here, which was basically the design of the 76 in the middle, the 45 on one side and the 45 on the other, and mounted it in a casemate. The reason why they mounted it in a casemate is because a normal KV turret was seen as not big enough because the crew couldn't fit alongside it. So the KV-7 was actually built, as you can see here, and it went through testing. Now, they basically took a KV-1, a KV-1's hull, and added a superstructure on top of it, so therefore the traverse of the guns I believe was pretty much non-existent. There is a part of this article which talks about, there was a little bit of traverse in these guns, or at least in the system itself which held these guns, but when I look at the picture like this, I very highly doubt if there was really any traverse here, and if there is any, there'll be just a little bit either side. So the reason why this idea fell through, basically, and this is the the KV7 side view, is that they could not accurately fire all the same guns, unanimously, and also because you had so many different guns in there, you couldn't fire them at a decent rate. It was basically seen that if you just have one big gun, that big gun could fire more accurately than three smaller guns, and you could also reload that big gun at a quicker pace than all three of these guns. Now, that doesn't mean that you could reload these slow, but the general impact of these three guns was just not good enough for what they wanted, and the accuracy was also bad. Something that definitely hindered the KV7 was during testing, the initial test they had with it with the three-gun setup with the 245s and the 76, is that when they didn't have a proper aimer, basically, or they didn't have a proper targeted sight, so they wouldn't be able to properly line up the targets that they were shooting at, and the one that they were using, every time they fired the gun, it actually knocked it. So it it unbalanced the whole damn thing. So you have a system where you can't aim, you have a new concept where you're dealing with basically three breaches instead of one. You have a bunch of crew trying to work out what the hell's going on, and at the same time there was complaints that the way that the ammo storage was set up was not efficient for what they were trying to do. So, what did the Soviets decide to do? Well, why not instead of just... Why not instead of, one 76 and two 45s, why not just get two ZIS-5 guns and stick them in? So this is the evolution of the KV7, and for me, I would prefer just to have this one because we have more pictures, and also I think it's just kind of a more interesting idea of having the three guns instead of just the two ZIS-5s, which would actually be kind of useful. So the big difference between this one that you see and this one is that the armor on this one was up to 120 on the front of it, so 120 millimeters, where this one had less, and obviously the gun configuration. So they tried this idea, and then eventually they just scrapped it. They thought it was much easier for them to be able just to go bigger guns, which they thought were better, and also they couldn't get the guns right. They couldn't get unified firing, and they couldn't get the accuracy down, which was the main issue that they were running into. So the project was scrapped, and they moved forward with other ideas when it came to SPGs. There's a bunch of assault guns and SPGs that the Soviets made, which were just completely crazy, and it would be nice to see them represented in the game. So for me, it would be lovely to see, this KV7 or this KV7, and it could be a gift premium. It would be completely useless unless it was at a crazy low BR, but I think it would just be fun to have because it's very similar to what we would see from, an event. It would be kind of like the Lorraine 155 without the speed and without the big gun. Instead, you swap it with three small guns and a lot of armor. So I think it would be fun. The next one is the, this isn't the cruiser tank. This is, I suppose it technically is. This is the Centaur. So if you don't know what the Centaur is, basically, the Cromwell has a 600 horsepower engine. The Centaur got the bad end of the stick, and it gets the 410 horsepower engine. There were three different cruiser tanks made at the same time. This was one of them. You basically had the Cavalier, the Cromwell, and the Centaur tank, and the Centaur and the Cavalier pretty much got the short end of the stick. So with the Cromwell, it had the 75, and also it had the 600 horsepower engine. This Centaur, unfortunately, got an elongated booty, as you can see from this picture, compared to the Cromwell, and also an engine which, let's just say, had its issues, but the main issue was it didn't have a lot of power compared to what others were using. Now, because of this, the Centaur is not really remembered compared to the Cromwell. I've talked about this vehicle in the past, but it's just not one which, you know, if people talk about British tanks, they bring up the Cromwell, they bring up the Crusader, which is kind of like the grandfather of all three of these tanks, and they also, you know, bring up the Churchill. Nobody really remembers the Centaur, and it's because, well, as I said, it's just basically the weaker brother of the Cromwell. What it does have, though, is a version of it, the Centaur IV, which was used from D-Day to V-Day. And this Centaur IV had the 95mm close infantry support gun that you see in this picture here. If you have a look right there, the 95mm would fire HE, and it was generally designed to, well, support infantry, go after other infantry members from the enemy, or designed to go after defensive positions. This was not really designed to fight tanks, but in a game like War Thunder, where we have a bunch of vehicles which are not really designed to take on tanks, I think the Centaur would, you know, fit perfectly. It's basically a slower, longer, Cromwell with a chub gun, is the best way of putting it. So I think it would be a lot of fun. The next one is the Type 95 Jiro Sha, or Jiro Sha, or it's also been known as the Jiro Sha. I'm not exactly sure which one is the correct name, but this is what what was supposed to be a 1930s heavy assault gun from the Japanese. There was a prototype which was produced, the Type 95 was produced in 1934. We have the Type 95 in the game. It's basically the rank 1 premium heavy tank that the Japanese get. You know how every nation, you know, gets a every nation gets a heavy tank of rank 1. I actually think it's one of the lowest played machines in game, which is kind of funny. Well, they took that chassis and they added a 105 gun to it because, well, why the hell not? And so this is basically what we're looking at. So we're looking at a big derpy gun, low velocity. Let's put a big hole in that planet over there. And to me, that sounds like a hell of a lot of fun. And since obviously the gun itself would be okay, as I said, low velocity, big HE slinger, maybe it will be kind of fun. And I think since the Rogo has had, or the Type 95 I should say, has had a bad deal of it in War Thunder, why not bring along its freakish brother so we can put some big holes in things? I think that's quite fun. The next one for the French would be the ELC AMX series, or the ELC Project. Basically, these tanks were designed to be incredibly light and dropped out of planes. Well, not dropped out of planes, I should say, airlifted in. They were there to support ground troops, and the idea was mobility and a big gun. The French really liked the idea of these little machines that they could conceal with large guns on them. So the ELC AMX series came along, and they never really got off the ground, to be honest. The need for them was seen as not really required, but they did make several interesting prototypes using the base chassis, and they all kind of worked around the idea of mainly 2 crew, sometimes 1, but the main idea was that you would have a very small machine which would be designed to pack a big punch, but also wouldn't cost too much and could also motor around the battlefield. So they're all around 6 tons. The idea of them, as I said, was to just be quick and just be aggressive when supporting infantry. And this is the main one that a lot of people talk about. It's the main AMX ELC. It has a 90mm mounted on it, and it has 2 crew. The one crew, the gunner, is actually halfway in the hull, as he is in the turret, and that is why it cannot actually fully traverse around while moving. When this machine is stationary, it can traverse, 360, but if it's moving, it can't because of where the gunner is sat. If you actually moved it, too far, you'd probably snap the gunner in half. So that's something to think about. There are some other designs of these ELC AMXs, and this is why I think it would be a good gift vehicle. You could take one of these designs, such as this one. Whoops. such as this one, and put it in the game as an event vehicle, and then you could stick this one in the game as a as a standard tech tree vehicle. You also have one which was designed to have 4 recoilless rifles on it. It was the Even 120. Then there was an Even 30, which had 2 Hispano Suiza autocannons on it. So you can see that here. That's that would screw up pretty much anything when it came to light vehicles. But for me, as a fan of scouting vehicles, this would be a lovely one to have. And the last one is, whoa. The last one is very much zoomed in. So, this is the L333. Now, we have the L333 in-game. It's a rank 1, smallest tank in-game right now, in War Thunder, and it's a little Italian thing. It's a 2-man crew, and it's got, I believe, a 20mm little auto. Well, no, it's not an autocannon, it's an anti-tank rifle, and it's not too good. It's not very good in-game. Now, there was a version of the L333 which kind of caught my eye, and it is something which would add a new mechanic, but as we've seen with some of the tests that they've done with specific vehicles such as the VS8, they are willing to test new mechanics with gift vehicles to see if they work, and then spread these mechanics, if they work well, to the broader populace. We also see this in the FJ4B, with the fact that it got bullpups before everything else. So, what am I talking about? Hello, boy, how are you doing? This is an L333 with a flamethrower attached to it. So, if we don't want to cause too much damage to people's frame rates, if we want to work out how the flamethrower is going to work in-game in some kind of actual physical way, instead of just murdering everything, or instead of being useless, this would be the way to do it. Introduce it in the form of a small gift premium, which we could work out, is it worth it? Is it working properly? And to me, it would be something to love. I would love to see it in game, just for that reason. Just as the VS8 and the FJ showed, it is really fun to get your hands on a gift vehicle which has a new mechanic just to see if it works or not. So, those are my picks for ground vehicles that I would like to see as event vehicles coming up in the new year. Or, next year, whenever, to be honest. Tomorrow or the next day, we'll have a look at some aircraft and then some naval stuff. I hope you all enjoyed this video. I'm gonna go back to bed.